welcome back to Pure Evil MMA. Right off the bat, let me introduce our guest today. We got Laura Kent, who works for MyMMANews.com alongside with me. So Laura, you're actually one of the first people from MyMMANews to meet my audience here. It's been a long time coming, and I'm glad that you're my first guest from work.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
So just a quick preview of what you guys can expect on today's show. Obviously, this weekend we had UFC Utica go down, which was on a Friday, and then last week it was on a Sunday morning. Like, there's just been a lot of madness, a lot of controversy, a lot of headlines. Me and Laura are going to break all of that down for you, kind of comment on some things that really stood out, and just let you guys know, if you can see behind me, unfortunately, if you're listening to the podcast right now, you can't hear any difference, but if you're looking at the video cast, you can definitely see a little difference. Let me give you guys a little quick view, because I'm going to be making two sets for Pure Evil MMA, and then the new podcast I'm doing with Ultimate Fighter Season 10. James McSweeney is also a UFC vet, and he's making a kickboxing movie right now, but we're going to be releasing the first episode soon, so we're going to make another set over here. On the wall there, you guys, you can see the UFC Pick'em rankings for the Pure Evil MMA team. And we're going to do a little designing, but you guys can check all that out on my Instagram at Pure Evil MMA. For everybody that's tuning in that wants to know a little bit about what went down this weekend, well, I just had Jimmy Rivera on the show. Laura, going into that fight, UFC Utica, it was kind of overshadowed by more headlines, more controversy headlines left over from the week prior, which was UFC Liverpool. So let's start there. I mean, I broke all that down, but now that there's been time to kind of digest it and look back, let's start with weight cutting and kind of, now how do you view weight cutting, especially when it's a main event? He was over 3 pounds overweight. How do you think this should have been handled?
That's an excellent question. Honestly, I wish in general that the UFC would just jump on board with what ONE FC has done, or ONE, I guess they dropped the FC now, right? So where they just weigh in at their natural weight, everyone bumps up one more, and it just kind of eliminates weight cutting altogether. Because I mean, not only did we have the Darren Till incident, but then also Mackenzie Dern, and obviously there's kind of this pattern now of all the people that do come in overweight, they end up winning if the fight goes forward. So I think that's clearly a really big advantage, and I mean, even Dominic Cruz went so far as to say, like, basically they're cheating at this point, you know? But then that video comes out, and obviously Darren Till, like, he couldn't see. I mean, it's just kind of getting intense. I mean, what are they waiting for? Someone to, obviously people have had some serious medical problems because of this.
Yeah, even to the worst of the worst that could come out of it, which unfortunately is death. And guys, it's not easy to talk about, but it has happened before, and there's a lot of people out there that it kind of feels like, honestly, like on the media side of thing, like if you're looking at it from the fans' perspective, they don't really understand it or see it for what we understand it as, like what these guys are going through with these weight cutting issues. And honestly, Darren Till came out to say this a few weeks ago, even before they set up the Wonderboy fight. He was like, naturally, I'm not at a welterweight, I'm a light heavyweight naturally. And, I've seen Mike Bond's tweet, which we can go over as well, his point of view, which I saw you retweeted on your Twitter page, which basically, in a nutshell, was his point of view was like, anyone that shames these fighters, screw you. You don't understand. But honestly, like, it's so frustrating when you're in a position where you're coming in overweight, and first off, to set the scene, like you were just saying, 6 people came in prior to this overweight that have won their fights. Now, also on this UFC Liverpool card, you had Meatball Molly coming on, and Jillian was on Pure Evil MMA that week to talk about the fight, and it was awful to hear that her fight opponent, which was Molly, came in overweight, and then Darren Till comes in overweight. They also have the hometown advantage. It just felt very unfair, especially when we know that everyone who's missed weight has won their fight.
Yeah, but wait, you know this better than I do probably. Didn't Jillian ended up winning her fight?
Yes, so Jillian...
So she's like the exception to the rule kind of there, right?
She broke it. Yeah, she broke that streak, and honestly, that's a great feeling for her, but it's an issue that's been happening so much this year. But with Darren Till in a position where you're headlining an event, and
Yeah.
you're facing the number one contender who really didn't want a part of this fight. Let's go back to Wonder Boy, who was saying, like, they didn't approach me about this. This is news to me, when they had Wonder Boy do the press conference and everything, or Darren Till do the press conference. He was like, I want Wonder Boy. Wonder Boy was like, I had no idea. So it almost seemed like he was pressured into this fight. And let's not forget what the UFC can tend to do with fighters who turn down fights. Look at the recent struggles with El Pantera.
Yair Rodriguez.
Yair Rodriguez. Look what happened to him. They sat him in the corner and told him to think about what he did. And it just gets everybody up. They brought him back in. But, you know, it just seemed unfair, especially if they're boosted up the rankings. Now, do you think that it's fair to move up the rankings if you come in overweight if the fight goes on?
No, definitely not. I mean, and Darren even kind of admitted afterwards, he was like, I still think that Wonder Boy should be the one getting the title shot if a title shot was offered, because I didn't even make the weight. And honestly, I have a lot of respect for him saying that, you know, because I mean, I think that's a really good point. Like, we saw the same thing with Mackenzie Dern. She knocked Angela Hill out of the top 15, and what, she basically came in like a whole weight class overweight. I mean,
7
how is
pounds.
that?
Yeah.
It just doesn't really make any sense. But I mean, the rankings in general don't make any sense.
Yeah, that's another thing that people tend to get into and get angry at about the rankings and everything. But right off the bat, I do not want anybody to think that I'm trying to throw Darren Till under the bus. And I really enjoy that he was like, you know, maybe I'll fight Usman next. And I think that's the right direction to go in, especially with RDA and Kobe Covington battling it out. I think that's the right direction to go in, to have him fight somebody like Usman. Now, also, in all this, what happens to Wonder Boy next? Because it really feels like he just got screwed.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was gonna say. I mean, part of the Darren Till fight, it's more of a slap in the face that he's not getting the interim title shot. I mean, Colby Covington, really? I just don't understand it, really. I mean, I know he's got the whole talking thing, hyping things up going on, and making Brazilians mad, making everyone mad, really. Like, I went to the point to just, you know, completely mute and block him on Twitter. Like, I don't even like seeing it because it's so ridiculous. Like, he's just, it's too much.
Yeah,
I really hope RDA wins this one.
He's even went on like Adam's podcast, MMA Roast, and he was like, I'm gonna put my nuts on his face in the middle of the arena. And then he does stuff like, he'll tweet out, just in case anybody doesn't know, Kobe Covington will tweet out like ruin the plots of movies that people are about to go see that are blockbusters. But you know what? I've had the privilege of actually speaking with him about a year ago when he was actually advocating for this fight back then, and nobody knew who he was. So just to see the growth of him going up and him holding character, because even during our interview, I was trying to get him to break that, and he wouldn't. He would not budge on it. So he's staying true to it, and it's earned him the interim shot. So I think, you know, that gaining a lot of interest is the way to go. Unfortunately, this day in MMA, it's really turned into an entertainment kind of thing. But, you know, let's circle back around to, like, what Mike Bond was saying. You retweeted it. Let me just pull it up for everybody really quick. Let me just grab that really quick, because I want to read exactly what he said, because I definitely see what he's saying. You know, we saw Darren Till, when you see the after footage and you see them, you know, barely even being able to hold themselves up, it's hard to look at. It really is. So here's the tweet from Dave Doyle, actually, who says, "Dear people in my mention saying, who cares if they almost die in their weight cut? That's their choice. You're the reason MMA culture is so much shittier than it should be." So before I give my thoughts, what's yours when you saw that?
Well, MMA fans kind of get a bad rap. I feel like I don't really group myself in with them, although obviously I am an MMA fan, but there's just a lot of hate and bashing whenever it comes to the athletes. I mean, they don't really understand what it's like. I mean, yeah, you could say just don't cut any weight, but if you already know that other people are cutting weight, and significant amounts of weight too, I mean, and that's your paycheck, you know, it's not just like you're doing this for fun, you know, you're on a high level and you want to make sure that you have an advantage too. It kind of becomes like a guessing game, like, oh, how much do you think they're cutting, and should I cut just a little bit more than that, kind of thing, you know, because if you think they might be cutting 15 pounds, but really they're cutting like 25, I mean, you don't know. Some people spread it over the course. I'm not saying like sweat out 25 pounds, but, you know, a lot of people are coming way down. Like you said, Darren Till, you know, is easily over 200 pounds. So
I
I don't
mean,
know.
there's so many controversies that are going around right now that need to be fixed, and somebody brought it to my attention. They're like, dude, this has been going on in boxing for a long time, and nothing's been done. And that is so sad. We can't let that happen to the sport. I mean, MMA, where it is right now and how it's growing, it's very crucial that, for instance, when UFC Liverpool went down, I was at my brother's house, and there's all these people that are watching for the first time. They don't know who any of these people are. But right off the bat, as soon as that judge's scorecards were announced, they were like, that was unfair. That was a hometown advantage. The Wonder Boy definitely won that fight. So it's kind of funny to see when these people who've never seen MMA before, they're kind of writing it off, being like, this doesn't seem right. That's cheating, and it turns them off completely to our sport.
Yeah.
It's so unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, it just delegitimizes things a little bit. I mean, that just kind of brings up, in addition to the weight cutting issue, the issue with judges and everything. I mean, we've had a lot of controversy about decisions in the past, and, especially close fights, people can go back and forth forever about, what they think. There was a lot of talk about, like, octagon control, I think, in that fight and how much that should be weighed. And it gets even more confusing when different commissions are going by different rules, and then the different rules brings in different qualifications for the scoring too. It's like, how does anybody really know what's going on? I mean, even on Twitter, I've seen different referees arguing back and forth, John McCarthy arguing with someone else about some of the calls that they've made. So even among professionals in the business, it
Even
seems
the
like
fighters don't know. They have no idea. It's like they're informed. Like, what was it? Somebody was saying in their last fight, Jason Knight, he was like, with the new rules in play, I should have won that fight. So it's like, are the judges informed of this? If the fighters barely know, how do you expect the judges to know? And let's go, to some people that are changing the game, like Eddie Bravo. What do you think about Eddie Bravo, allowing up kicks in, EBI? Do you think that kind of will help people open up their minds to be like, and maybe he's right with the upkick thing, because it doesn't really happen that much, but it does help the fight where if the threat is there, then you have to change position. What's your thought on that?
I love it, honestly. I'm very excited about the up kicks. Basically, I feel like my coach was a big part in bringing that into play. J.M. Holland, he was in the very first Combat Jiu-Jitsu event that was like part of another EBI event, and then also in Combat Jiu-Jitsu Worlds. And he's known pretty well for being a guard player. He likes to guard and he likes lockdown and stuff like that. So, I mean, he pretty quickly pulled guard the first time, but the second time he even kind of stayed on his feet longer. But I mean, eventually it's going to go to the ground. That's what we want to see, right? I mean, we don't want to see people just standing up and like, slap fighting or just wrestling.
And we see that a lot because they can get away with it. You know what I mean? And just for anybody questioning you, and they're like, your coach is, well, who is it? You train with 10th Planet. I forgot to tell everybody that. So let's get a little bit about background for you before we jump back into that conversation. You trained at 10th Planet. You're a purple belt, correct?
Blue belt.
You're
Yeah,
a blue belt.
I'm still a blue belt. Yeah. I actually got my blue belt at a gi school before I switched to 10th Planet. I've been there in September. It'll be 2 years at 10th Planet. So it's been like a year and a half-ish. Yeah, I love it. Actually, I drive pretty far to get there too. Like, it's almost a 2-hour drive for me, but I'm so willing to go out of my way because I really think it's like one of the best schools on the East Coast. I mean, I can't say enough about how awesome my coaches are and just the opportunities that I've gotten since I started there too. I mean, they run their own event that's an EBI rules tournament, the finishers sub only, and I got a chance to be like on the first female finishers sub only. So I've already competed under EBI rules as a blue belt, which I feel like a lot of people don't get that opportunity, So, yeah, I really dig it.
And you know what? You travel, too, to cover these events as well. You were recently in my state, and you're from Pennsylvania. So you came from Pennsylvania all the way to Connecticut to cover.
Oh, no, I didn't. I was watching from home.
Oh, okay.
With my nice little square box. Yeah, the stream was rough, I'll tell you that much. But, I mean, it was still good. That's another one of those tournaments that's kind of popped up with the EBI rules. You'll see, like, more and more 10th Planet schools are just like, well, if everyone else is doing it, let's try this too. And I love that the finishers sub only was, like, one of the first schools to do that.
And, where's Submission Underground been? Because they started off really hot, and they had people like Misha Tate. They had people like, I think, wasn't John Bones in one of them? Chael was in it. You had Hendo. I think it was like Hendo versus John Bones in a grappling match. They had like
Yeah.
SUG 2 or 3. But have you any update on that? Where SUG's been? I mean, since Chael signed to Bellator, it's been quiet.
Right? What was that?
Since Chael went over to Bellator and been doing his thing, it's kind of quieted down a little bit, I feel.
They had an event, I don't know, a few months ago, and they introduced that tag team grappling. Did you see that at all?
No, I didn't.
I don't know how I feel about that. It's kind of weird, but when you're in certain positions, I guess it's almost like WWE-ish because of the tag team aspect. Like, literally, people are tapping in, and I think you have, like, a certain period of time to switch out positions and see if you can reverse the position. So, like, if you're in a bad spot, you can kind of, like, wiggle towards your partner and slap them in.
He can figure this one out, right? And they put you in that position?
Yeah.
Weird.
I don't know. I tried watching some of it, but it seems a little confusing. But it piqued people's interest, and they're still trying to do different things that are new. Honestly, I'm more of like, obviously, the EBI rules.
Yeah, and I think that's the leader right now, especially with UFC Fight Pass being able to be the platform for that as well. So the big announcement, which was the up kicks, do you think with that announcement, Eddie Bravo, do you think maybe now the UFC will look into maybe having the up kick? Let's circle back to that. What do you think about that?
What, the up kicks?
Yeah, how much do you think that it... Whoop. Hello, check. Can you hear me?
Oh, now I can, yeah.
All right, I just checked out. But do you think that since Eddie Bravo introduced it and kind of explained it to a huge portion of the MMA scene on Joe Rogan's podcast, do you think, if they see a success in EBI within the next year or two, do you think maybe they'll change the rules in the UFC? Do you think that's a good...
Wait, maybe you're thinking about it differently than I was thinking about it. Are you thinking about it where, like, the person being up kicked still has their knees on the ground? Is that what you're saying? Because right now,
explain what Eddie has brought into play.
Okay, so maybe I don't have a full grasp on this, but whenever I thought about up kicks, I thought about it the same as UFC rules. I didn't really picture people like getting kicked in the face while they're on the ground. But if you watch like JM's match against Sidemar Ornario, I think his name is, he's from one of the gyms in Philly. I'm not sure which one exactly. I'm a terrible person. It might be... Yeah, I don't know.
There's so many to remember. I don't blame you.
Basically, he's on the ground for a large portion of it, and Sidemar is like standing over top of him and kind of like won't even go to his knees. He's slapping like from a distance, just kind of lunging in towards the ground. So I think that's the situation where Eddie envisioned it. Like, I mean, if up kicks would have been legal, then he could have up kicked from that position, but that type of thing is already legal in UFC rules. It's hard to up kick someone when they're already down on the ground with you because they're so close.
Yeah.
But that's a good question. I might have to ask JM about that because, yeah, I don't know if they mean up kicks. I guess since the Athletic Commission is the one that approved it, that's why I envisioned it being similar to the UFC rules, where it's only when the one person is clearly standing and not when they have like a couple knees on the ground.
Yeah, I heard Eddie explain it pretty well. So if anybody listening wants to go back and hear that, I think it was like last week on Rogan's Fight Companion where he kind of brought this up, and we'll get you more information about it. But getting into UFC Utica, let's break into a little bit about UFC Utica, what went down this weekend. You had Jimmy Rivera going in there. He was on the show. He said there's going to be big bombs landed. But it really felt like this card went under. And I think a big reason for that being is having it on a Friday. And then the week before, like I said, was on a Sunday. Do you find that weird? Does that kind of throw you off? Because for me, it's hard to get excited for a fight that's either in the morning or just like Saturday just seems so right for fights.
Well, not only that, but I think people get in a certain habit and then they unless you're like really following it, I mean, going on the UFC website, looking things up, most people don't even realize, so they just miss it. And then Saturday rolls around and they're like, oh, that was last night. I didn't even realize, you know? So, I mean, I think Sunday was probably a little easier, maybe, just because on Saturday night, obviously it didn't happen, but then you still have it the next day.
And it was a
But I mean,
holiday.
who's
Yeah.
really tuning in the middle of the day on a Sunday? You know, just weirdos like us.
But at the same time, it seems like in those situations, why isn't Bellator right there? Like, if people are expecting cards to be on a Saturday, like if you don't have your ears to the track, like, you know, media members or diehard fans, you're not going to know it's on a Friday. But if you're expecting a fight on a Saturday, because there's usually fights on Saturdays, there's Bellator. Bellator, I don't know, it just seems like so common sense to look at what the UFC is doing and kind of plan behind that. Even though it seems a little sneaky, dirty, or whatever, it works. It really does. You see when they have the pay-per-views and people don't want to buy the pay-per-view because the headliner isn't too exciting, but Bellator's also on. Hey, let's tune into Bellator.
Yeah.
You know what
I mean, that makes a little more sense, but also I don't really understand why Bellator would. I wish they would just like they claim Fridays and UFC claims Saturdays or something like that, because I think Bellator doesn't necessarily do well when they try and counter program against the UFC, unless, like you said, it is like a really weak pay-per-view and Bellator is free type deal.
Yeah. Well, another big thing with Bellator is, you know, the tape delay and all this, and I talk about it till I'm blue in the face. I really thought they would have figured all this out by now.
Yeah. I mean, I think any event is going to suffer when there was a jiu-jitsu event. Actually, I want to say it was like not the last Rise, but Rise Invitational 3, where they were supposed to air on UFC Fight Pass. And even like they announced a certain day and then it ended up not being that day. And by that time, I mean, 2-3 weeks later, everyone already knows what happened. When you are watching something, especially if you have like teammates or something in it, you want to be watching live or else you're going to find out on Twitter. And I mean, you know, it's still fun to watch things after you know the results.
It's not the same. You know, you got to really go back to why we love this sport. It's because we're at the edge of our seat. It makes us feel alive. When it's on tape delay, you're like, it just sucks. It sucks everything out of it. It just absolutely ruins it. And also another exciting thing, I mean, it just seems like back-to-back headlines that have been coming out. Bare knuckle boxing went down this weekend. I did not catch it. It was on pay-per-view. I saw the replays. Rowdy Beck getting the win. Finally, she was on like a 4-fight losing streak, but now she's the bare knuckle champ. So congratulations to Beck. What's your thoughts on bare knuckle boxing coming into play? Because it's been around for hundreds of years, but they didn't have the right platform support. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think it was a success? Seeing what
I mean, it definitely seems like it. I don't watch it either, but I was kind of following along on Twitter, and at one point I even thought about buying it because it looked like everyone was enjoying it so much. I mean, I definitely think it's interesting, and I mean, it brings up a lot of, you know, Joe Rogan is always talking about how his ideal rule set for MMA and stuff, and he talks a lot about how you know, the gloves are protecting your hands more than they're protecting the other person's brain. So I don't know. I think it's a good outlet for people that do want to test that out. Obviously, Rowdy Beck did really well, and I'm pretty happy for her too. Like, I'm a fan, so, you know, I was hoping that she would pull out the win. I don't really know anything about the other girl, so.
Oscar, stop it. So here's the thing about all of it, though. I spoke with Bobby Gunn. Hold on, let me get my dog. Bro, my listeners love when I do that on the live streams. And I mean, when I say they love it, they hate it. So I spoke with Bobby Gunn about 2 years ago, I'd say, who everybody knows who Bobby. If you know bare knuckle boxing, you should at least know who Bobby Gunn is. He was such a role model in the sport. When you think about bare knuckle boxing, if you're my age, you're going to think of people like Kimbo Slice. I really wish Kimbo was still around because he would be the star for this. It feels like such a missing spot without Kimbo there. And Bobby Gunn even was trying to get that to be the first bare knuckle boxing pay-per-view that was fully commissioned and done the right way. And unfortunately, that wasn't able to happen. And if there's one thing that was missing last night, I wish they gave somewhat of a little tribute to Kimbo, because I don't think many people would know what bare knuckle boxing is without Kimbo Slice. I don't think people even know what YouTube is, honestly, without Kimbo Slice on. Like, going back, you went on YouTube to watch Kimbo slice. You know what I mean? So that it just felt like that was missing. But all in all, like you were saying, looking at Twitter, it did seem like it was a success, and it kind of made me want to buy the pay-per-view. But at the same time, what held you back from that? What didn't let you buy that pay-per-view?
Oh, geez. I don't know. Part of it, I guess, was that it was already halfway through. Like, I'm kind of stingy, and I didn't get home from work until a little bit later, so I wasn't going to pay, like, full price for half of it. Honestly, I don't even know how much it was. I probably should have
It was
checked
only
that.
like $24, but at the same time, if people aren't buying the UFC pay-per-view cards, if they laugh at Bellator pay-per-view cards with people like Fedor, I wonder how many people bought this pay-per-view and how many people illegally streamed it, but at the same time, it just seems like it had all the things, but for me to buy something like that, it was missing something, and I don't know what it was exactly, but maybe it was just because it was so new. Maybe I felt like...
And we don't really know the names yet, with the exception of Rowdy Beck. I mean, I really don't think I knew any of the people that were on that card. And usually what gets me to watch fights or jiu-jitsu matches is because, like, I actually care who's going to win, which requires me knowing at least a little bit about
their
who's
story.
participating.
Yeah. I think that's a big commitment about it. And another thing is having people like Rowdy Beck fighting somebody that is unknown. It almost seemed like I saw somebody bring it up, and you can give me your take on it, but maybe it wasn't about Rowdy Beck's opponent, but it seems like in a lot of bare-knuckle boxing fights, they bring up these big names to fight people pretty not off the street, but people who are very inexperienced. You know what I mean? To kind of build a name off of it. And they were saying, in a way, that's fixed fighting. And I kind of agreed with that. What do you think?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And it reminds me of something else that I saw last night,
Which is
because
what?
a few people were talking about another one of the fights, and I saw a lot of people tweeting that it looked like it was a fixed fight, like some guy just,
Took the
kind
fall?
of took a dive. And yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder, as far as the skill set goes, I mean, anyone can win or lose on any given day, I don't know how much experience the other girl had. Obviously, she's not a UFC fighter or anything like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not like Beck was doing spectacularly in the UFC, as much as I hate to say it.
Again, she was on like a 3 or 4 fight losing streak.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can't really speak to how lopsided it may have been. Obviously, there's definitely going to be fights that, I mean, the first person that comes to mind really is Gabby Garcia, and the people that they set her up with, like
the older wrestling women
that are super small. And I mean, obviously that type of thing, yeah, it definitely seems like a fixed fight there. I mean, does anyone really think that the 40, 50, 60-year-old lady's gonna win?
What gave it away in that fight, though, is when she was bouncing off the ropes like that. Like, what is going on here? And if this is your first event, I'm sorry. You can't be doing stuff like that if you want people to take your sport seriously. Like, if you get the slightest feeling that this is fake or rigged, it's a huge disconnect there. There's a huge disconnect, and it takes away from the other fighters on the card that are putting in the work. And I understand, like, you kind of got to make a showy for people to want to tune in, but when it's that kind, like I can understand Gabby being like a big star because she's kind of like, she stands out. You know what I mean? She's a big girl. There's not many girls around that are that big besides Chris Cyborg, and she's even bigger than Chris. But you know what I'm getting at here. It's a circus event. And you don't want that if you want your sport to be taken seriously. Look at some of the big reasons why Bellator is not taken seriously when they're putting on stuff like Kimbo versus Dad. And I don't mean to use Kimbo in the highest of praise and the lowest of lows here in the same show, but I hope you get my drift here.
Yeah. Well, not only that, you have to wonder how much that went into his eventual death. I mean, I don't know. People don't talk about it that much, but obviously that fight took a lot out of both Kimbo and his opponent. So...
Yeah.
I mean, it was just kind of a controversial bout to set up. And Bellator, I think, is in a different situation where they're trying to be more legitimate, like the UFC, whereas Ryzen is kind of like this outside, foreign promotion that's just kind of like feeding off the fact that they're going to be like the circus event, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, they really don't care. They're like, all the crazy shit you want to see.
That's what that crowd wants to see, especially on New Year's or whatever. But, hey, my mic keeps cutting in and out because I keep moving. But getting further on in the show, another huge announcement that went out this week that it would just not be right if I didn't mention. Michael Bisping stepping away from the octagon in kind of a weird way. He did it on his podcast, which I guess is genius, but it just doesn't feel right at the same time. When you think of an MMA fighter retiring, how do you picture him doing it?
Usually in the cage. I mean, I don't know. I really like the ones that are in the cage because they just kind of get that feeling, and like, maybe I'm weird and ritualistic, but I like when they take the gloves off and leave them there. It just seems so much more formal. But at the same time, it's gotten to the point where it's so hard to take people seriously about the retirement thing. Like, I thought Bisping was retired, and then he wasn't, right? I mean, am I crazy here? Because people just say it, but then they're not really. What they mean is until that one special fight that's going to get me a lot of money or X, Y, and Z. I mean, I don't know. Maybe this is the real end for Bisping. It certainly seems like it, and everyone's kind of acting that way. But, I mean, you see it with a lot of different fighters these days. It's just so hard to keep track of. Like, because I feel like Carlos Condit is another example. Like, people talk about it, and you can't tell if, like this, is this a formal announcement? Is this your final answer? Or what's really going to happen here? Even Alexander Gustafsson was another one that I think talked about stepping away or something, but now he's not. And it's just kind of, yeah, confusing to keep track of.
It's weird because you make a good point, because a lot of these guys that retire, they're back within 5 years. And when you have people like Uriah Faber who retires and then immediately is inducted to the Hall of Fame, like it just seems weird. There's just something weird about that. And MMA, a lot of people say that they retire all the time, but they come back into it because they don't have anything else to do. Great example of this is BJ Penn. A great example of this most recently is Chuck Liddell. Guy's about 50 years old.
Yeah. I know, and basically it seems at this point like he's really determined to fight either way, even if he ends up just in Bellator, which seems to be like, you know, people joke about how Bellator has become like the cast-offs of the UFC whenever they're old and retired and want to come back. I mean, obviously we've got like Tito, Chael, all those guys over there. Now Chuck's talking about it too. It's just kind of one of those things. I mean, it's sad, really, because, I mean, wasn't Chuck getting paid by the UFC for the longest time? And then now with the switch of management, he's not getting that anymore. And it's just kind of, you know, what do you do? Because these fighters don't have, for the most part, retirement set up unless they're saving on their own, which they should be. But I can also imagine how hard it could be when, I mean, especially in the Reebok era, you're not exactly raking in the dough depending on how high up on the scale you are, you know?
And it's so sad because when you think of Chuck Liddell, like, honestly, like, when I mention MMA, like, to my dad's friends or UFC, they only know one person, maybe two. It's Chuck Liddell and BJ Penn. Those are the two people, and they still think that they're fighting and champions. You would think that they have millions and millions of dollars with all the success, all the people that know them that don't even watch the sport or claim they watch the sport or whatever. It's sad when they have nothing that they feel like they have to return to fight. And at the same time, like, I'm not saying I wouldn't watch Chuck Liddell come back and fight, but at the same time, if you're his family and you really care about the guy, and you know, I obviously care, but if it's going down, I can't stop it, so I'm gonna watch it. You know what I mean? I cover the sport, and I love every second of it. But it's just sad because a lot of these guys don't stay retired, and they can't figure it out. And one thing that worries me about Michael Bisping retiring is, obviously, there's one thing that we know that we would think he can fall back on is his commentary, but FS1, Fox, no longer is going to be holding the UFC. It's moving over to ESPN. So it makes me question if ESPN is going to be bringing over Karen and Dominic and DC all as a commentary team, or what their plan is. Is that going to be there for Michael Bisping? I mean, he has his podcast, but these are things you worry about in this sport because going back to where we started, the rules and the way that things are right now are just still so old school in the leather helmet area, like people like to say, that these fighters don't have anything to fall back on like the NBA players or the NFL players.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it seems like Leslie Smith is trying to, fight a good fight with Project Spearhead. And
let's get into Leslie Smith, because I think she got done dirty there, and this ties into all of this. I mean, another person that missed weight, her opponent missed weight, in case nobody knows. Going into the fight, Leslie Smith did everything that she could have done to show up on weight, ready to fight, knowing it was the last fight on her UFC contract, going there to win. And then her opponent misses weight, and the fight's called off. The UFC hands her pink slip, and she's off on her way. No longer is able to fight, which really just felt so unfair, because any fighter that speaks up, usually this happens to.
Not only that, but I mean, if you look at the comments on her Twitter account, I mean, the fans have just been tearing her apart, and it kind of breaks my heart because, I mean, they're just like, shut up, go away, you know, trying to act like she was scared. I mean, look at her fight with Jessica I, where her ear was like blatantly hanging off, and she's like, no, I'm good, let's keep going. I mean, she fought Chris Cyborg, who's just huge compared to her.
No, first off, she saved that card. She was like, I'll fight Cyborg, and saved the day for the UFC.
Exactly. I mean, people don't give her enough credit. Like, I've seen so many of her fights in Invicta, too. I love Leslie Smith. I'm a huge fan of her. And, I mean, I really hope that she gets to where she's trying to... I just feel like there's not enough support right now as far as the other fighters go. Like you said, everyone's afraid now because they basically made an example out of her. So no one wants to speak out, especially the big name people, because they have so much little that they're, I mean, more to risk and less that they can gain because they're already doing well with the UFC, unlike some of the lower fighters. So, I mean, it's not like they're the ones that are struggling to get by. So, I don't know. It's hard.
And this happens to a lot of fighters where it just feels like they just didn't get a fair handshake. But with Michael Bisping, going back to him and everything that he accomplished, when he was in positions where it was like, all right, if I lose this fight, I'm probably going to be gone. Or if I win this fight, I'm going to get that next step for the championship title. And it was always like that through Michael Bisping's career. And going all the way back to Ultimate Fighter and just all the fights that he's been in, they're all very, very tough fights. And he was never really given the spotlight. He was always kind of like the underdog that people really disliked. But at the same time, he brought that excitement to the fight. But he never gave up. You're going to hear this about Michael Bisping. When you hear people talking about Michael Bisping, if there's one thing that you can look to, it's kind of like he's like the Eminem. He's like the 8 Mile of MMA, where it's like he got walked all over, somebody fucked his girl, but he still showed up to fight. Like, look at Dan Henderson and what happened at UFC 100. That would be embarrassing for anybody that would just put their tail behind their legs and open a coffee shop or something, and leave MMA behind. This is a guy that was just like, no, fuck that. I'm getting back in there. And it was so awesome to see towards the end of this guy's career. Like, when he was handed that fight with Anderson Silva, and got knocked out by that flying knee where there was a Nolan action. I mean, I've talked about this so much when that happened. You know, for him to be able to come back and win that fight and then go on to get the belt against Luke Rockhold on short notice and then get the rematch against Dan Henderson where it was almost a flashback of the first fight where he literally almost got H-bombed again in the first round, comes back to win it. Even though it was close, on the record, it's a W. And just, you know, we know where his career ended, but just to see how he never gave up and just, it's very remarkable. A very remarkable career.
Yeah, I mean, he's so impressive, and he's one of those guys that, like, people love to hate him, but he's so hard not to like, too. You know, because he can kind of be an asshole, but he makes you laugh. And the two things that I thought of recently, both Tim Kennedy and GSP were on, you know, Joe Rogan's podcast, and both of them, even though they were former opponents, had nothing but good things to say about him for the most part, to the point where Tim was even like, don't tell him I said this, you know? But, I mean, I don't know. It's just great hearing the different stories about him. And yeah, his career has been, like you said, I mean, especially with the Anderson Silva fight, like for that all to go down and not let it screw your head up going into that next round is just, that's a lot of fortitude.
It's inspirational is what it is. It really is. It's so inspirational. And like you were just saying, like, you know, he's the guy that everyone loves to hate, but it would just be weird without him. And now we're going to go on without him, and we're looking for these new characters. I mean, picture, like your favorite movie, which for me is Gangs in New York. I think that's one of my top movies. That would be like me watching Gangs in New York without the Butcher. Like, Michael Bisping's the Butcher in the Gangs in New York, and it wouldn't be the same without him. You know what I mean? So we need to find these new characters, and honestly, there are a couple coming out that are coming big stars, but you know every time Michael Bisping fights, there's going to be something fun, a highlight to come out of it. There's something to look forward to. Now that he's off of it, his presence is going to definitely be missed. So there's my little piece on Bisping. For you, though, if there's one Bisping memory, what is it?
Oh my gosh, that's such a difficult question.
There's so many. There's the Luke Rockhold knockout, which was just absolutely crazy. Towards the beginning of his career, some of the fights that he's won then. Jesus. When he was, I think a good Michael Bisping memory is when he coached Ultimate Fighter with Mayhem Miller. I don't know how many people remember that. That was the last season that they aired on Spike. And it brought in a lot of views, and there were a lot of fun pranks on that season. That's a good one. What stands out for you?
Well, he's been on The Ultimate Fighter a few times, hasn't he?
Yeah.
I love whenever he was, I feel like he did like one of those Nations ones, didn't he? No, that was the one he did against Tim Kennedy, wasn't it? Am I making this up right now?
Here, I got my phone somewhere.
Because wasn't it like Britain versus the U.S. or something like that?
This was, give me 1 second.
Are you Googling?
I'm going to UFC really quick.
I should definitely have a better memory, because when I first got Fight Pass, I watched all the Ultimate Fighter series. I don't know why people bash on it so much, and I know it's kind of like outdated at this point and people are ready to move on, but I loved the Ultimate Fighter series. I think it really lets you get to know people and actually like form that bond that I said I kind of need in order to really care about a fight.
And you know what? It's so sad because going all the way back to season 1 of the Ultimate Fighter, that was when I was in high school, and everybody watched that. And it's another thing that they just announced. Why can't I find? There's another thing that they just announced this week. It is officially gonna be the last. Like, ESPN didn't say anything about Ultimate Fighter. We kind of all just knew it was the end, and there's gonna be one more season, guys, and that's it. And then they're gonna be transferring over to ESPN come January. So we can look forward to season 28. Coming up this summer, but at the same time, I don't know. I really feel like people are gonna miss it. I really do. As much as people like to hate it, and I know that the ratings aren't as good, but me personally, I'm gonna miss the shit out of that show. I've interviewed so many people that have made careers off of that show. It's a career maker. Like, what's his name that it was recently? Jay Cuccinella, who's on this season Ultimate Fighter. The last week's episode, he went in to talk to Dana White, and he was like, this show is opportunity, and I want the opportunity to get another fight. And he was totally right with that. It really sums up the Ultimate Fighter. Ultimate Fighter is a huge opportunity for so many fighters. Let's look back at some of the big names that came out of it, like Michael Bisping, like Nate Diaz, like the list goes on and on. Yeah, Rashad Evans from season 3. I mean, Matt Serra getting the win. Let's see, with Tim Kennedy. All right, so Michael Bisping's career. Let's go all the way back. There's so many fights. Jesus. So starting with the UFC, the Ultimate Fighter, June 24th, 2006. He beat Josh Haynes, Eric Schaefer, Elvis Sinsonic, Matt Hamill. Then he lost to Rashad Evans at UFC 78. And then UFC 83. He wins. Jason Day, he wins. Chris Lieben, he wins. He loses to Dan Henderson at UFC 100. Then he comes back, beats Dennis King, loses to Vanderlei, wins against Dan Miller, wins at UFC 120, beats Jorge Rivera at UFC 127. Jason Mayhem Miller, 2011, he wins, loses against Chael Sonnen, wins against Brian Stann, loses against Vitor Belfort, wins against Alan Belter, loses against Tim Kennedy.
That was 16th. The one. It was a Tough Nations event.
Tough Nations finale. Yes. Got it. Also on that card, Cote Noak. Yeah, wow. Elias Theodoro. That was Elias Theodoro's season.
That was one of my favorite seasons of Tough, honestly. I'm really a big fan of Elias, and especially like now, even after the Ultimate Fighter, watching him on Twitter, and he's like a ring card boy, and he's like a witty guy.
I've had the pleasure of interviewing him, and he's been on my show, and people don't realize that he has more success outside the octagon than he even does in it. I mean, he's on the cover of 8 romance novels. He's been like his it goes on and on. It's just crazy. Now he's doing the ring boy stuff, and a big round of applause that he won his fight this weekend, opening up UFC Fight Pass, and that's another big thing. Before we end the interview, let's talk a little bit about UFC Fight Pass, since you're kind of involved with, EBI and 10th Planet. What do you think about these fighters that are, premiering on UFC Fight Pass? There's a lot of fans out there that are like, Fight Pass is shit. If you're a fighter that is premiering on UFC Fight Pass, you suck. I mean, Dana White's Tuesday Contender Series was built on there. You have all of these EBI events. You have Titan FC. You have all of these things on UFC Fight Pass. I don't see one reason, if you're an MMA fan and you rent Netflix, why would you have Netflix over UFC Fight Pass is beyond me.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Fight Pass. I mean, I've been a subscriber since the early days, and I usually just go for like the year membership to save money because you can pay it all for a year instead of doing like the $10 a month or whatever it is. The biggest thing I'm worried about, I feel like they've got great content on there too. Obviously, I'm going to keep it no matter what for EBI because that's the easiest source to watch all of that. But, I mean, they've got like the fight history catalogs and everything. But the ESPN deal makes me nervous because they've got the whole ESPN Plus going on. The only thing that makes me feel a little better is I saw that if you do like the $4.99 or whatever it is for ESPN Plus, I guess there's like a $5 add-on for UFC Fight Pass. Because I mean, you're not going to want to pay $10 a month and then another $5 for ESPN Plus, right? So, I mean, they've got to figure out some way to kind of work together, because now it's 2 streaming platforms.
It's a mess.
And I mean, it just makes it so much more complicated for the fans. And it seems like there's not going to be any live UFC events on Fight Pass anymore. They'll all be ESPN Plus. Am I right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the details are.
Which might be better but at the same time, if you're an MMA fan, you don't want to fuck with the basketball, the NHL, the NFL, and the NBA. You don't want to fuck with all that over there on ESPN Plus. And I'm not giving you I haven't tried it out to see it, but just when I think of that, I have an ESPN app, and that's what it is. And I know I can filter it to just MMA, but why can't that all be on one package under the UFC brand? Like, if UFC is branding with ESPN, why can't they just... It's a mess, man. It's a mess. Yeah. And I'm interested, Eddie Bravo had something to say about it too, and apparently he was just told it was like, don't spaz or something like that. It was
yeah. I heard him saying about that on the Fight Companion, like before he even asked, someone had already reached out to him.
I was like,
don't worry about it. It doesn't affect you or EBI. But, I mean, the other thing is Eddie had kind of started, inchbyinch.tv. So not only is it available on Fight Pass, but you could also get... I always go with Fight Pass because I already pay for Fight Pass. But if you're not someone that pays for Fight Pass and you just wanted to get, the individual pay-per-view for EBI or Combat Jiu-Jitsu... Now he's got the pay-per-view available on inchbyinch.tv for the past few.
Which is what? Just in case our listeners don't know here at MyMMANews.com what that is exactly. Is it an app? Is it on a website?
It's just a website that you would go to. And you can log in, but I guess it's really just an individual site that's one page mostly set up for being able to buy the pay-per-view, and you could just stream it through. I'm pretty sure it's just Eddie's personal site that he sells it on.
Well, listen, because in the jiu-jitsu world, and it really is even though when people think of MMA, that's kind of involved in the pool, but there's some people that are just all about jiu-jitsu. There are some people that are just all about kickboxing. There are some people that are just all about Muay Thai. There are some people that are just all about wrestling. You know what I mean? So with that being said, I'm happy that there's another platform. And one more time, what was the name of it for everybody? Inchbyinch.com?
Inch.tv.
That's a crazy name for Eddie to come up with, because when I heard
this... Inch is one of Eddie's, slogans, I feel like.
Look into it. Another one of Eddie's slogans. But honestly, what is it like, before we close this interview out, in case anybody's interested that's listening, on maybe I should go try jiu-jitsu out. What has your experience been like so far with 10th Planet?
Oh gosh. I mean, it's hard because I'm not a beginner anymore, so now I'm jiu-jitsu obsessed, so I'm so far from that, just starting out
So what can people expect as just beginners, maybe not at 10th Planet, but what can they expect, just entering a BJJ class? And how do you know if you're in the right place?
That's a good question. Most people just go with like the most convenient location to them. I think that's probably the best way to start out. Another thing that kind of tips people's off is like the name of the gym. Honestly, when I first started, I was just like looking for some gym that had Gracie in the name because,
Yeah, of course,
obviously
of
they're the
course.
famous jujitsu family. So, I don't think it really matters as much where you start, because you're just kind of testing the waters and it'll take you a little bit to really know if you want to do it or not. I mean, actually, people talk a lot about the blue belt blues, and I feel like that's the biggest point where, like, after a year, 2 years of training, and maybe you get a promotion, you're kind of at the point where, like, either you decide, yeah, this is good enough, like, I've got my base level and whatever, I feel like I can defend myself mildly on the street, or you, like, go all in, which is kind of what I did,
Yes.
Like, as soon as honestly, it was right after I got my blue belt that I switched schools and started training with 10th Planet and just, like, basically got really motivated to get competitive with it. I mean, the competitions is what motivates me. Some people just do it for a hobby, which is fine too. Everyone's got their own reasons, whether it be a hobby, self-defense, or to be like sport jujitsu competitive. I'm a big fan of sport jujitsu. I mean, obviously I like the idea of being able to defend myself on the street too, but I just really like needed some form of competition in my adult life that gets me motivated, keeps me eating well, and just kind of keeping up with all of those things. Like, it gives me a reason.
Yeah, there's a difference between a hobby and being passionate about something, and that's something I love about covering MMA or working for MyMMANews.com, because every morning I'm interested to see what's going on in the MMA community, in the world of MMA. Like, it just makes you feel alive, and I'm so thankful for just mixed martial arts in general. And honestly, thank you so much for joining us here today. Finally, on Pure Evil MMA under MyMMANews.com, guys. I mean, we have so many great people at MyMMANews.com, and I want you guys all to meet some of them. So, what are some of the things that you've written so far for the website that people can check out?
Oh gosh, I write about EBI all the time. Obviously, I just wrote about the change with the up kicks and everything, and about how, JM kind of helped with that. I do other little like submission-only events. I wrote about the Radius Invitational that was not long ago. I'm going to be coming out with a preview not too long from now about the next EBI event that's all females, with another combat jiu-jitsu match in there too. So mostly that type of thing. I've also done like just little interviews, like Grace Gundrum is one of my little phenom teammates. She's probably like one of the more well-known teammates that I have. So, I did like a feature on her at one point.
Yeah, you gotta.
Yeah, exactly. Mostly I just all the people that I'm a fan of or teammates with, I just like hyping people up and giving them credit where credit is due, because especially in the jiu-jitsu scene, like MMA gets covered pretty broadly, but there's not as many jiu-jitsu focused outlets, and especially for the smaller competitions, that are just starting out.
Yeah.
I covered the finisher sub only, which is my school's competition, like I said, and Ultimate Mat Warriors is 10th Planet San Diego's competition. So those type of things I like to bring a little bit more of a light to.
And you guys can find all this at MyMMANews.com and on her Twitter and Instagram page at Lauralies10P. That's LAURALIES 10P. Thank you so much for joining me here today once again, and I want to wish you a blessed day. Last but not least, behave yourself.